When someone wakes in the middle of the night with racing thoughts and they can't get back to sleep, is that just stress? The problem is, when most of us hear stress, we default to psychosocial stressors, work, relationships, caregiving. Those matter, but there are at least four more elements to stress that may not immediately come to mind. First, physical stressors: fasting, cold exposure, intense exercise, chronic low energy intake. These trigger the same stress response as bad news or deadlines. Your brain and body don't separate emotional stress from physical stress the way we might think about them. The result is similar: higher arousal, more light nighttime alertness, more wake-ups, and more difficulty falling back asleep. Second, metabolic issues. With insulin resistance, you often see larger post-meal glucose spikes and then steeper drops. These drops don't have to reach hypoglycemia. Your brain can interpret a fast downward glucose trend as a fuel threat and trigger counter-regulatory stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. That can raise heart rate, increase alertness, and create the wired and tired feeling. Additionally, higher visceral fat often accompanies metabolic issues. Visceral fat is metabolically active and tends to increase baseline inflammation. And that brings us to the third point. By the way, if this helped, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next videos with more sleep insights that go beyond sleep hygiene. Now back to the video. Chronic low-grade inflammation. Even from things that may not be a formal diagnosis, and even with inflammation markers technically within the normal range. Early subclinical fatty liver, for example, or ongoing gut issues activate immune system. And yes, gut issues can exist without Crohn's or IBD, IBS. For example, frequent reflux, bloating, altered gut patterns, gut irritation are enough to raise baseline inflammation. And because cortisol is anti-inflammatory, when inflammation rises, the body increases cortisol as a countermeasure. And then there is the fourth factor that often hides in plain sight: caffeine. We usually talk about caffeine as a sleep pressure issue that affects falling asleep because it blocks adenosine receptors. That, of course, matters, but caffeine also interacts with the HPA stress axis. So if you still have caffeine circulating during sleep, it can keep you in a more activated state than you want, resulting in, again, lighter sleep, easier wake-ups, and more difficulty returning to sleep. By the way, caffeine metabolism varies widely between people and even from day to day for the same person. So there isn't a fixed cutoff time that works for everyone, or even for the same person in different contexts. So is it just stress? An overactive sympathetic state in the middle of the sleep period is one of the big reasons people wake up at 2, 3, 4 a.m. or just too early in general and then can't return to sleep. But stressors that affect sleep include more than work or responsibilities. It can include anything from physical stressors to inflammation to caffeine, plus how reactive your stress response is in the first place. And here's where midlife physiology becomes more relevant: stress reactivity. How strongly your stress response activates from the same stimulus often changes in midlife because there is a hormonal component here. Both testosterone and estrogen influence stress reactivity. For some people, the same stress that used to be a non-event starts showing up in sleep as a brain that won't power down. So in some, it's not just stress, and by stress, it's not just emotional stress. In the average, generally healthy individual, there are typically three core axes that affect sleep: autonomic tone, as it relates to stress and stress reactivity; metabolic status; and circadian alignment. All of these affect each other and contribute to light, shallow sleep, even if someone can fall asleep fine, leading to 3 a.m. wake-ups and or short sleep and or generally unrestorative sleep, even if these disruptors are not yet enough to actually wake someone up. So, if you're waking at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and you've been assuming it's just work stress or life stress, here are 4 things to get you started this week. First, look at your physical stress load. If you're training in the late afternoon or evening, consider moving it earlier to the early afternoon or dialing back the intensity for a week or 2 and see what happens. Second, if you're on a low-calorie diet or you're deliberately eating in a caloric deficit, increase your calories for a week or 2 so you're eating at maintenance or even a little bit above. Third, if you're doing cold exposure at night, consider moving that to the early afternoon or even late morning. The timing alone here can make a big difference in how this stress response impacts your sleep at night. Fourth, caffeine. Consider drinking your last cup of coffee 2 hours earlier for 1 to 2 weeks and then moving it earlier again. You don't necessarily need to cut out coffee, but by either reducing the total dose or moving the dose earlier, it can give you actionable information. The key takeaway here is that your body treats all of these things the same way it treats a stressful meeting or bad news. It raises the same hormones, and those hormones may still be elevated when you're trying to sleep. So now you have 4 things to get you started. And if all of these apply, adjusting even one of these for a short period can tell you a lot about what might be contributing, so you can start to work towards getting the sleep you want. By the way, if you want the single strategy that has improved sleep by 90% in some of my clients who have already dialed in their sleep hygiene, check out this video right here.